The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying with it the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Ranger Ethan Calloway tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he drove slowly along one of Redwood National Park's quiet dirt roads. He had been patrolling these trails for years, but today felt different, like the calm before a storm. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, their songs blending with the rustling leaves. But there was an odd stillness that lingered beneath it all. Ethan loved mornings like this. It was peaceful, almost magical, with sunlight filtering through, the towering redwoods that seemed to touch the heavens themselves. Yet as much as he cherished the solitude, his instincts never fully relaxed. Years of working in the wilderness taught him to trust the subtle signs, the way animals behaved, the silence when it shouldn't exist, or even the feeling in his gut. And right now, something about the atmosphere made his senses tingle. As he rounded a bend in the road, his eyes caught movement near the edge of the forest. At first he thought it might be a deer or a fox darting between the trees. But then, two small figures emerged from the dense underbrush, staggering into view. They were children, dirty, disheveled, and clearly terrified. One was a boy, no older than 10, clutching the hand of a younger girl who looked barely 7. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. For a moment, they froze, staring at Ethan with wide, panicked eyes. Ethan's heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. He pulled his truck to a stop and stepped out cautiously, not wanting to startle them further. "Hey there," he called out gently, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. His voice was calm, steady, but inside his mind raced with questions. What were two kids doing alone in the middle of nowhere? Where were their parents? Were they hurt? The boy took a hesitant step forward, pulling his sister closer to him. She buried her face in his arm, trembling visibly. Ethan knelt down, keeping his tone reassuring. "It's okay. I'm here to help you. My name is Ethan. I work here in the park." For a long moment, neither child spoke. Then, finally, the boy swallowed hard and whispered 5 words that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "They're still out there." Those simple words carried so much weight. Ethan didn't need to ask who they were. The fear in the boy's voice said everything. Someone, or something, had driven these children into the woods, leaving them lost and vulnerable. Whatever danger they had escaped, it wasn't far behind. Ethan glanced around quickly, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Nothing stirred except the wind swaying the branches above. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. These kids needed warmth, food, and safety, and fast. Without wasting another second, he ushered them toward his truck, opening the passenger door and helping them climb inside. He grabbed a blanket from the back seat and wrapped it around their shivering bodies while offering them bottles of water. As they settled in, Ethan climbed back into the driver's seat, his mind racing. Who were they? What had happened to these children? And most importantly, how could he keep them safe until he figured it all out? The inside of Ethan's truck was warm compared to the chilly morning air outside. The heater hummed softly, filling the silence as the two children huddled together under the blanket. Their eyes darted nervously between each other and Ethan, unsure if they could trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. Ethan noticed their hesitation but didn't push them. Instead, he focused on keeping his movements slow and calm, offering a reassuring smile whenever their gazes met. "Here," he said gently, handing them a small bag of trail mix he kept in the glove compartment. "Eat something. It'll help." The boy hesitated for a moment before taking the bag, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it and offered some to his sister first, making sure she ate before taking any for himself. Ethan watched silently, his heart aching at the sight of their exhaustion and fear. These kids were clearly trying to stay strong for each other, even though they looked like they hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. After a few minutes, the boy seemed to gather enough courage to speak again. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. We ran away. They came into our camp." Ethan leaned forward slightly, careful not to startle him. "Who came into your camp?" he asked, his tone steady and kind. The boy glanced at his sister, who clung tightly to his arm, her face pale and streaked with dirt. She didn't say anything, but her wide eyes spoke volumes. Finally, the boy continued, his voice shaking. "Men, 3 of them. They wore masks and carried guns. We were sleeping, and then they started yelling. My dad told us to run. He said to hide." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Masked men with guns? This wasn't just an accident or a random encounter, it sounded deliberate. And where were the parents now? Had they been taken, hurt, or worse? "What? About your mom and dad?" Ethan asked carefully, choosing his words with care. "Do you know where they are?" The boy shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know. We didn't see them after that. We just ran." His sister buried her face against his shoulder, muffling a sob. Ethan reached out and placed a comforting hand on the boy's knee. "You did good," he said firmly. "You protected your sister, and that's what matters right now. You're safe with me, okay? I'm going to figure this out." For the first time since finding them, the boy gave a slight nod, though his expression remained haunted. Ethan knew he needed more information, details that could help piece together what had happened, but he also understood that pressing too hard might overwhelm them. They were already traumatized, and pushing for answers could make things worse. Instead, Ethan decided to focus on practical steps. "Can you tell me where your camp was?" he asked. "Even if you're not sure exactly, maybe you remember landmarks, a big tree, a stream, rocks, anything like that?" The boy thought for a moment, his brow furrowing in concentration. "There was a big fallen tree," he said slowly, "and a ridge with lots of rocks. We followed the stream for a while because I remember Dad saying water always leads somewhere." Ethan nodded, mentally mapping the area based on the boy's description. That section of the park was remote and rugged, which explained why the kids had wandered so far without finding help. But it also meant whoever, or whatever, they were running from might still be nearby. As the truck rumbled along the winding road, Ethan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, scanning the dense forest behind them. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that danger might still be lurking just out of sight. Yet, despite the tension building inside him, he forced himself to stay calm for the sake of the children. "You're doing great," he reassured them again, his voice steady. "Just hang in there a little longer. Help is coming and we'll find your family, I promise." The boy looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. After a moment, he gave another small nod, clutching his sister closer. For now that fragile trust was enough, and Ethan vowed to do everything in his power to protect them. Ethan knew time was of the essence. Every second counted, not just for the safety of the children, but also for uncovering the truth about what had happened to their family. He reached for his radio, pressing the button to call headquarters. The static crackled briefly before a familiar voice came through on the other end. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Calloway," he said, his tone calm but urgent. "I've got 2 minors in my truck, siblings. Looks like they've been lost in the park for at least a couple of days. They're scared and say there were armed individuals involved, requesting immediate backup and notifying local law enforcement." The dispatcher responded quickly, promising to send help as soon as possible. Ethan ended the transmission and turned back to the kids, who were still huddled together, under the blanket. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting nervously toward the windows as though expecting trouble to appear at any moment. "Okay," Ethan said softly, leaning forward so they could see his face clearly. "Let's try to figure out exactly where your campsite was. Can you remember anything else about it? Anything that might stand out?" The boy nodded hesitantly, gripping his sister's hand tightly. "There was a big rock near the tent," he said, his voice trembling. "And
Mom put up a red flag on a stick so we could find our way back if we wandered off." Ethan made a mental note of the details.
a red flag would be easier to spot from a distance, especially if search teams combed the area later. But for now, he needed to focus on getting closer to the site himself. If these men were still nearby, every step had to be taken carefully. As They drove deeper into the park. Ethan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, scanning the road behind them. The forest seemed eerily quiet, almost too still. Normally, this part of the park buzzed with life, birds chirping, squirrels darting between trees. But now, the silence felt heavy, unnatural. It only added to the tension coiling in his chest. After a few minutes, the boy spoke again, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Do you think they'll hurt us?" Ethan's heart clenched at the question. He twisted slightly in his seat to meet the boy's frightened gaze. "No," he said firmly, injecting as much confidence into his voice as he could. "You're safe with me. I won't let anyone hurt you or your sister, okay? We're going to find your parents, and we're going to make sure those bad guys don't come anywhere near you again." The boy stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for reassurance. Finally, he gave a small nod, though his grip on his sister's hand didn't loosen. Ethan decided to keep talking, hoping to distract them from their fear. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Lucas," the boy replied after a pause. "And this is Lily." "Well, Lucas and Lily," Ethan said with a warm smile. "You're doing amazing, really brave. Most people wouldn't be able to stay as strong as you two have." Lucas managed a faint smile at that, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Lily remained silent, her head resting against her brother's shoulder. Ethan noticed how protective Lucas was of her. Always making sure she was comfortable, always putting her needs first. It was clear the siblings shared an unbreakable bond, forged even stronger by the horrors they'd faced. Finally, they arrived at a narrow trailhead that matched Lucas's description of the area near their campsite. The path was overgrown, barely visible beneath layers of fallen leaves and branches. Ethan parked the truck and turned to face the children. "We're going to go take a look, okay? But we need to be really careful. Stay close to me, and if I tell you to hide, you do it right away. Understand?" Both kids nodded solemnly, their expression serious despite their exhaustion. Ethan grabbed a flashlight, a first aid kit, and his rifle before stepping out of the truck. He helped Lucas and Lily climb down, keeping one hand on Lucas's shoulder as they began walking along the trail. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper into the woods, the sunlight filtering weakly through the dense canopy above. Ethan moved slowly, scanning the ground for clues. After about 10 minutes, he spotted something. A piece of fabric snagged on a thorny bush. It was torn and dirty, but unmistakably part of a tent. His pulse quickened. They were close. And then, just ahead, they saw it, the remnants of a campfire surrounded by scattered belongings. A backpack lay open, its contents spilled across the ground. Nearby, a tent sagged awkwardly, half collapsed and torn. The scene was chaotic, evidence of a struggle frozen in time. Ethan crouched down, examining the area closely while keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding trees. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't over yet. The campsite was a mess, like the aftermath of a violent storm. Scattered belongings lay everywhere. Clothes, cooking utensils, even a child's stuffed animal half buried in the dirt. The tent was torn, its fabric ripped and sagging as if someone had yanked it down in a hurry. Ethan moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. He scanned the area, taking in every detail while trying to piece together what might have happened here. Lucas and Lily stayed close behind him, their eyes wide with fear. They recognized some of the items. The blue backpack their mom always carried, the red flag they'd used to mark their camp. But everything felt wrong, out of place. It was as though their safe little world had been shattered overnight. Ethan knelt beside the remains of the fire, which had long since burned out. He poked at the ashes with a stick, noticing something glinting faintly beneath the charred wood. Carefully, he brushed away the debris to reveal a small metal object, a pocket knife, its blade snapped off. Whoever had attacked this family wasn't playing around. This wasn't just a robbery or a random act of violence, it was calculated, deliberate. "Stay right here," Ethan instructed the children firmly, his voice low but steady. "Don't move until I say so." He stepped further into the clearing, examining the ground for tracks or any signs of where the attackers might have gone. There were footprints, several sets, all leading away from the campsite, but they were partially obscured by leaves but whoever these men were, they knew how to cover their trail, making it harder for anyone to follow them. Still, Ethan spotted drag marks near the edge of the clearing, suggesting that something or someone had been pulled through the underbrush. His stomach tightened at the thought. If Lucas and Lily's parents had been taken, time was running out. People who operated this way didn't leave loose ends, and if these men discovered that 2 kids had escaped, Ethan shook the dark thoughts from his mind and returned to the children. "Lucas, Lily," he said gently, crouching down to their level. "I need you to think hard. Did your parents say anything before they told you to run? Anything about why these men might have come?" Lucas frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Dad said something about the package," he murmured after a moment. "But I don't know what he meant." He sounded scared. Ethan's instincts flared. A package? What could that mean? Drugs? Stolen goods? Something valuable enough to warrant armed men hunting down a family in the middle of a national park? Whatever it wasn't good. Just then, a sound broke the silence. A distant rustling, followed by voices. Low, muffled, but unmistakably human. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively moving toward his rifle. The voices were too far away to make out clearly, but they were definitely coming closer. "Get down," Ethan whispered urgently, pulling the children behind a cluster of rocks nearby. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for them to stay quiet. His heart pounded in his chest as he peered around the edge of the rock, scanning the trees for movement. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Ethan counted 3 distinct tones, low, gruff, and clipped, like soldiers communicating without speaking directly. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were professionals, disciplined and dangerous. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't take on 3 armed men alone, especially not with 2 terrified kids depending on him. But he also couldn't let them find the children, or the evidence left behind at the campsite. He needed to buy time until backup arrived. Quickly, he formulated a plan. "Lucas, Lily," he whispered, turning back to the kids. "When I say go, I want you to run back to the truck as fast as you can. Don't stop no matter what, do you understand?" Lucas nodded, clutching his sister's hand tightly. "What about you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'll be right behind you," Ethan promised, though he knew there was a chance he wouldn't be. "Now listen carefully. When I give the signal, head straight for the path we came in on. Don't look back, okay?" The siblings exchanged a frightened glance but nodded again. Ethan gave them one last reassuring smile before focusing his attention on the approaching voices. He grabbed a handful of small stones from the ground and began tossing them into the bushes opposite the direction of the truck, creating noise to draw the men away. The diversion worked. The voices shifted course, moving toward the source of the disturbance. Ethan waited until he was sure the men were distracted, then turned to the kids. "Go," he hissed. Lucas and Lily bolted, their tiny legs carrying them as fast as they could down the trail. Ethan watched them disappear into the trees before grabbing his rifle and slipping deeper into the... Ethan moved swiftly but silently through the dense forest, his every step calculated to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. The voices of the men grew louder as he positioned himself strategically, ensuring they wouldn't accidentally stumble upon Lucas and Lily. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from exertion but from the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. 2 children were counting on him to keep them safe, and failure wasn't an option. The terrain was treacherous, uneven ground covered with roots and rocks that threatened to trip even the most careful hiker. But Ethan knew this park like the back of his hand, and he used its natural obstacles to his advantage. He climbed over a fallen log, crouching low behind it to observe the men now moving closer. Through the gaps in the foliage, he could see them clearly for the first time. They weren't just armed, they were heavily equipped. Black tactical gear, combat boots, and rifles slung across their shoulders marked them as professionals. One man carried a machete, using it to hack at branches blocking their path. Another held some kind of handheld device, scanning the area as if searching for something specific. Their leader, a tall figure with a scar running along his jawline, barked orders in a clipped tone, his eyes sharp and calculating. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to retreat, to get out of sight before they spotted him, but he forced himself to stay put, analyzing their movements and listening closely to their conversation. Bits and pieces floated toward him through the trees. "Can't have gone far," one of them muttered. "Split up if we have to." "No," the leader snapped. "Stick together. We don't know what else is out here." Ethan's stomach tightened. These men weren't just dangerous. They were cautious. They wouldn't hesitate to shoot first and ask questions later. And if they found Lucas and Lily, or worse, realized Ethan was on to them, the situation could turn deadly in seconds. He decided to act. Grabbing another handful of pebbles, he tossed them deeper into the woods, creating a new distraction. The sound echoed faintly, drawing the men's attention. Instantly, they froze, their heads snapping toward the noise. The leader signaled with a wave of his hand, and the group began moving cautiously in that direction, their weapons raised. Ethan exhaled slowly, relieved that his plan had worked. For now. He slipped away quietly, circling back toward the trail, where Lucas and Lily had run. His mind raced as he navigated the uneven ground. How much time did he have before they realized they'd been tricked? Would the kids make it to the truck safely? And how long until backup arrived? When he finally reached the trail, he broke into a jog, following the faint footprints left by the children. It didn't take long to find them. Lucas and Lily were huddled behind a large tree near the edge of the clearing where the truck was parked. Both looked terrified but unharmed, their chests heaving from the effort of running. "You made it," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside them. "Good job." Lucas nodded, though his face was pale. "Are they still coming?" he whispered. "4. Now they're heading the other way," Ethan replied. "But we need to move. Get in the truck and lock the doors once you're inside. If anyone tries to open it who isn't me, hide under the seats and stay quiet, okay?" Both kids nodded, solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. Ethan helped them climb into the cab, watching as they scrambled into the passenger seat and locked the doors behind them. He grabbed his radio from the dashboard and called dispatch again, his voice urgent. "This is Ranger Calloway," he said. "I've identified 3 suspects armed with tactical gear. They're dangerous and likely involved in illegal activity within the park. I need immediate air support and additional units on site. Coordinates are being sent now." As soon as he ended the transmission, Ethan heard the distant crunch of footsteps returning. The men must have realized they'd been misled. Time was running out. He stepped away from the truck, positioning himself between it and the approaching danger. If these men came too close, he'd do whatever it took to protect the children, even if it meant putting himself directly in harm's way. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Ethan stood his ground, his rifle slung over his shoulder, but his hands free and ready. He knew he couldn't take on 3 armed men alone, but he also knew that giving up wasn't an option. The children in the truck were depending on him, and he'd sworn to keep them safe no matter what. Every fiber of his body was tense, his senses heightened as he listened for the slightest sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, anything that signaled the men's approach. They weren't far now. Ethan could hear their voices again, sharp and urgent, laced with frustration. They had realized they'd been tricked, and it wouldn't take them long to retrace their steps back toward the campsite and the truck. Ethan glanced at the vehicle, where Lucas and Lily sat huddled together, their wide eyes watching him through the window. He gave them a small nod, trying to convey calmness, even though his heart was racing. Then an idea struck him. If he could lead the men further away from the truck, deeper into the wilderness, it would buy the kids more time, and maybe even allow backup to arrive without putting them in direct danger. But doing so meant stepping fully into the lion's den, drawing their attention entirely onto himself. It was risky, but it was the only choice he had. Ethan grabbed a thick branch from the ground and used it to smack against a nearby tree trunk, creating a loud thud that echoed through the forest. Then, he tossed a rock into the bushes, making it sound like someone was clumsily moving through the underbrush. Almost immediately, the voices stopped. There was a moment of silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots crunching against dry leaves as the men changed direction. "They're coming," Ethan muttered under his breath, slipping behind a cluster of dense shrubs. He moved quickly but carefully, keeping low and using the natural cover of the forest to mask his movements. His goal was simple: stay just visible enough to keep their focus on him while staying far enough ahead to avoid being caught. The strategy worked. Within minutes, Ethan heard the men shouting to each other, their voices closer now. "There! Movement near those rocks!" one of them barked. Ethan didn't look back. Instead, he darted around a massive redwood, his boots barely making a sound on the soft earth. He led them deeper into the woods, away from the trail and the truck, knowing that every step took them further from Lucas and Lily. But these men weren't amateurs. They moved efficiently, communicating in short bursts and covering each other's blind spots. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting as they closed the distance between them. He reached a steep incline and scrambled up it, using roots and protruding rocks to pull himself higher. From this vantage point, he could see the men fanning out below, their weapons drawn and their expressions grim. One of them spotted him briefly as he crested the ridge. "There he is," the man shouted, pointing upward. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, weaving between trees and leaping over fallen logs. His lungs burned, and his legs screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain, knowing that stopping meant disaster. As he descended into a narrow ravine, Ethan spotted something that made his pulse quicken: a shallow cave hidden beneath an overhang of moss-covered rocks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide in for a few moments if he needed to catch his breath or lay low. He ducked inside, pressing himself against the cool stone wall as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Peering cautiously through the entrance, he watched as the men slowed, scanning the area. Their leader raised a hand, signaling for silence. For a moment, all was still. Then one of them knelt to examine the ground, brushing aside leaves to reveal fresh footprints. Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. If they found him here, it would be over. But if he timed his next move perfectly, he might still have a chance to turn the tables. He reached for a loose rock beside him, gripping it tightly. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting two innocent lives. And Ethan wasn't about to let anyone hurt Lucas and Lily, not while he still had Brady. The seconds felt like hours as Ethan crouched in the shadows of the cave, his breathing shallow and controlled. The men were dangerously close now, their boots crunching against the dry leaves just outside his hiding spot. He could hear their low voices, sharp and calculating, discussing which direction to search next. One of them pointed toward the ravine, his silhouette visible through the gap in the rocks. Ethan tightened his grip on the rock in his hand, knowing that if they discovered him, he'd have only one chance to act. But then something unexpected happened. A distant sound cut through the forest, a faint whirring noise that grew louder with each passing second. Ethan's heart leapt as he recognized it. Helicopters. Backup had arrived. The men froze, clearly startled by the sudden intrusion. Their leader barked orders, his voice tense. "Fall back, now!" They scrambled to retreat, moving quickly but not before exchanging hurried glances filled with frustration and anger. Ethan waited until their footsteps faded into the distance before, slipping out of the cave, his body still coiled tight like a spring. He knew better than to let his guard down completely. The men might regroup or try to ambush him. But the arrival of air support changed everything. Ethan wasted no time heading back toward the truck, retracing his steps as fast as he could, without making too much noise. When he finally reached the clearing, relief washed over him at the sight of Lucas and Lily still safely inside the vehicle. Both kids looked pale but unharmed, their eyes wide as they watched him approach. "It's okay," Ethan said immediately, opening the driver's side door. "Help is here. We're going to get you somewhere safe." Lucas nodded, though his expression remained worried. "Are they gone?" he asked quietly. "For now," Ethan replied, climbing into the truck and starting the engine. But we need to move. Stay down and stay quiet, all right? As the truck rumbled along the dirt path, the noise of the helicopters grew louder. Through the windshield, Ethan spotted two choppers hovering above the treetops, their rotors whipping up gusts of wind that sent leaves spiraling into the air. Park rangers and law enforcement officers rappelled down ropes, fanning out across the area with precision and speed. Ethan radioed them again, providing updates on the suspect's last known location and warning them about the men's tactical gear and weapons. Within minutes, teams were deployed to intercept the suspects. Ethan drove the truck to a nearby staging area where paramedics and additional officers waited. As soon as he parked, Lucas and Lily 跳下车，紧紧抓着彼此的手，眼神中充满了恐惧和疲惫。医护人员立刻上前检查他们的身体状况，确保他们没有受伤或生病。Ethan 蹲下来，与他们平时，声音温和而坚定：“你们做得很好，现在安全了，我会一直在这里陪着你们。”尽管如此 ，Lucas 的眼神仍然透露出深深的担忧。我们的爸爸妈妈，他们在哪里？他的声音颤抖着，几乎要哭出来。Ethan 的心就成一团，他明白孩子们最需要的是希望和安慰。我们正在努力找到他们，他说，有很多人正在帮忙寻找你们的家人，你们要相信，我们会尽一切可能让他们平安回来。就在这时，一名警官匆匆走过来，向 Ethan 汇报最新情况。我们在北边区域发现了几个可疑任务，已经包围了他们。另外，搜索队找到了一些线索，可能是关于失踪父母的下落。听到这些话， Lucas 的眼睛亮了一点点，但泪水依然挂在脸颊上。Ethan 轻轻拍了拍他的肩膀，说道：“看，事情正在朝好的方向发展，你们只需要再坚持一会儿，好吗？” Lucas 点了点头，把妹妹搂得更近了一些。Ethan 站起身，看着远处忙碌的救援队伍，心中燃起了新的决心。无论前方还有多少困难，他都会守护这两个孩子，直到真相大白，家庭团聚的那一刻。The staging area buzzed with activity as officers, rangers, and paramedics worked together to piece together the events of the past few days. Ethan stood near Lucas and Lily, keeping a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, while updates trickled in from the search teams. The suspects had been cornered in a dense section of the forest, their weapons confiscated and their movements restricted by heavily armed law enforcement. It was only a matter of time before they were brought in for questioning, but Ethan knew that catching the men wasn't enough, not yet. The children's parents were still missing, and until they were found, this story wouldn't have a happy ending. He knelt down again, meeting Lucas's anxious gaze. "Listen," he said softly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The people who took your mom and dad are being taken care of right now. That means we're closer than ever to finding out where they are. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded, though tears still glistened in his eyes. Do you think they're okay?" he whispered, clutching his sister's hand tightly. Ethan hesitated for just a moment before answering. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep, but he also knew how important it was to give these kids hope. "I think they're fighters," he said firmly, "just like you two. And we've got a lot of good people looking for them. We won't stop until we bring them back." Lily finally spoke up, her voice small but clear. "What if they don't? Come back?" Ethan felt his chest tighten at the question. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "We can't think about what-ifs right now," he said kindly. "All we can do is focus on what's happening, on all the people, working hard to find them. And trust me, no one is giving up." As if on cue, another officer approached holding a map marked with coordinates. "Ranger Calloway," the man said urgently. "We found something, a cabin about 3 miles north of here. There are signs it's been used recently, and there's evidence someone might be held inside." Ethan's heart raced. This could be it, the breakthrough they needed. "Let's move," he said, standing quickly. Turning back to the kids, he added, "Stay here with the paramedics, okay? I'll be back as soon as I know more." Lucas grabbed his arm, panic flashing in his eyes. "Please don't leave us," he begged. "I won't be far," Ethan promised. "And remember, you're safe here. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. I need you to be brave just a little longer, all right?" Reluctantly, Lucas let go, and Ethan jogged toward the convoy, preparing to head to the cabin. His mind raced with possibilities. What would they find there? Would the children's parents be waiting, frightened but alive? Or would they uncover something worse? The drive to the cabin was tense, every bump in the road amplifying the uncertainty hanging over the group. When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The cabin sat tucked into a clearing, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. Officers surrounded it cautiously, weapons drawn, while Ethan stayed close behind, his own rifle ready. "Clear," came the call from inside after a few agonizing minutes. Then another shout. "We've got survivors!" Ethan rushed in, his breath catching in his throat. There, sitting on the floor and bound with rope, were a man and woman, dirty, bruised, but alive. Recognition hit him immediately. These were Lucas and Lily's parents. The reunion happened moments later when Ethan led the couple back to the staging area. Lucas and Lily ran to them without hesitation, throwing themselves into their arms. Tears streamed down all their faces. As they clung to each other, the nightmare finally over. As Ethan stepped back to give the family space, he allowed himself a rare smile. The danger was behind them now, thanks to quick thinking, teamwork, and a little bit of luck. But as he watched the family embrace, he reminded himself why he did this job: to protect people like Lucas and Lily, no matter what it took. Later, that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of gold and purple, Ethan stood alone in the quiet forest. He took a deep breath, letting the peace of the wilderness wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he allowed himself to feel proud of what they'd accomplished.